Snow fell thick over Times Square, the kind that turned neon into watercolor smears, softening even the sharp edges of the city. Holiday garlands glittered above storefronts, and shoppers rushed past with bags digging into their wrists. It smelled like roasted chestnuts and subway steam. Amid the blur of horns and laughter, Lila Walker, 6 years old and bursting with questions the way only children can be, tugged her father's hand. "Daddy, why is that lady eating from the trash? Doesn't she have a home?" Her mittened finger pointed across the icy street, trembling, not from cold, but from concern. And if this story already stirs something in you, give this video a like and comment the city you're watching from. Who knows? Someone near you might be watching this same moment too, reminded that small questions from children can open the heaviest doors. Ethan Walker, mid-40s, tall, polished in a charcoal wool coat, stopped mid-step. A man used to closing billion-dollar deals and silencing boardrooms, he found himself speechless at his daughter's innocent question. His late wife, Anna, used to tell him, "Children see truth before the world teaches them to look away." Tonight, under the falling snow, he felt that truth cut into his chest. Across the street, under a flickering street lamp, a young woman in a worn gray coat bent over a public trash bin. Not like a scavenger clawing desperately, but with an odd gentleness. As if she were sifting through something precious. She pulled out a wrapped sandwich, brushed off the crumbs, and knelt before a small boy perched on a metal bench. Carefully, she split the sandwich in half and handed him a piece first, her fingers shaking only when his little hand closed around it. The boy, maybe 6 or 7, devoured his half as though it were a feast. She watched, shoulders relaxing just slightly before nibbling her own piece. Ethan's chest tightened. He had been so consumed by business dinners and silent grief that he had forgotten what hunger, real hunger, looked like. He might have stood frozen there if not for the sudden crack of a voice slicing through the air. "Hey! You again!" A security guard, barrel-chested in a too-tight jacket, stormed toward her. His words boomed loud enough for the crowd to hear. A woman dragging shopping bags stopped mid-step, whispering to her companion. A man yanked his son closer by the arm. Heads turned. Judgment was as quick as the cold wind. "I told you last week, Monroe. Get the hell away from here." His voice dripped with disgust. "You wanna eat garbage, fine. But not out here in the open where customers can see. You're stinking up the block." The young woman, Grace Monroe, stood slowly. She didn't argue, at least not right away. She just pulled the boy closer behind her, her spine straight though her coat sagged with wear. "Don't talk to me like that in front of a child," she said, her tone steady but soft. The guard snorted. "Lady, you think you're some saint? Look at you, filthy coat, busted shoes, no future. What are you even feeding that kid? Rat scraps? That's child neglect if you ask me." The words stung sharper than the wind. Grace's lips quivered despite herself. She clenched her fists, as if trying to will her tears away. But the boy whimpered and clung to her sleeve, and that was too much. The tears came anyway, hot against the freezing night. Her voice cracked. "I'm just trying to feed him." The guard sneered. "Yeah, and I'm just trying to keep this street clean from trash like you." Ethan's fists balled in his coat pockets. Around him, passers-by whispered, some shaking their heads, others smirking as though humiliation was entertainment. His daughter, though, his sweet Lila, looked up at him with wide, wounded eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging harder at his hand. "Do something." And something in him broke. "That's enough," Ethan barked, stepping off the curb and crossing the street. His voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the murmurs. The guard turned, startled. "Sir, I didn't realize." "I don't care who you thought she was," Ethan said coldly. "You don't scream at women like that. Especially not in front of children." The guard's bravado faltered. "I was just doing my job, sir." This ain't the place. You're done here, Ethan snapped, eyes icy. Walk away. For a moment, silence stretched. Then the guard's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly, retreating with muttered curses under his breath. The crowd began to disperse, but the air still hummed with judgment left behind. Grace stood frozen, her hands still clutching the boy's. Her eyes, dark, tired, rimmed with humiliation, blinked rapidly, as though bracing for another blow. She tried to hide it, but Ethan could see the tears she hadn't wiped away. Before he could speak, a small voice piped up. You can have mine too. It was Lila. She had dug a half-finished cookie from her coat pocket and now held it out with both mittened hands. Daddy says I make them too sweet. Grace blinked. For the first time, the steel in her eyes softened. Her lips quirked into a faint, almost disbelieving smile. Thank you, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice catching. Ethan opened his mouth, but another sound sliced through the night. The sharp clack of heels on pavement. The restaurant doors nearby swung open, and a tall woman emerged, her long black coat fluttering behind her. Well, well. Her voice carried mockery like perfume. Grace Monroe. Still digging through trash, I see. Grace's body stiffened. Her jaw clenched. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Vanessa Cole. Snow-blanketed Times Square like powdered sugar on a cake, softening the neon glare of billboards that towered above the city. Shoppers rushed along with their bags swinging at their sides, carols drifted faintly from a department store speaker, and steam curled up from a subway grate. It was Christmas in New York, loud, bright, and unforgiving. Amid the chaos, Lila Walker, 6 years old with wide brown eyes and a pink coat that made her look like a peppermint candy, tugged her father's gloved hand. Her little bunny ear mittens pointed across the street. Daddy, why is that lady eating from the trash? Doesn't she have a home? Her voice, soft yet piercing, cut through the city noise like a bell. And if this story touches you already, give this video a like and comment the city you're watching from, because sometimes, stories like these remind us that even in the busiest places, humanity can still be found. Ethan Walker, mid-40s, CEO of Walker Tech, a man accustomed to stock tickers and glass boardrooms, froze mid-step. He was dressed in a long charcoal coat, his jaw set in that firm way executives wear their control. Yet his daughter's question shook something loose in him. His late wife Anna used to say, "Children see the world clearly before we teach them to look away." Tonight, under the falling snow, he realized how much he'd been looking away. Across the icy street, a young woman in a faded gray coat leaned over a public trash bin. But she didn't claw or rummage like the desperate people Ethan had trained himself not to see. No, she moved slowly, carefully, like someone handling something fragile. She pulled out a wrapped sandwich, still intact, barely touched, brushed off crumbs, and then turned to the little boy waiting on a nearby bench. The boy looked 7 at most. His shoes had holes at the toes, and his thin jacket was no match for the wind slicing through the square. His small hands were red with cold. When she knelt and split the sandwich in half, offering him the larger piece, his eyes lit up. He devoured it with the hunger of someone who hadn't eaten since yesterday. Only after she watched him swallow the first bite did she nibble at her own half. Something tugged in Ethan's chest. He had sat through dinners worth thousands, half the plates wasted, wine poured out like water. But here was a woman who treated a half-eaten sandwich like communion. He might have stood there in silence forever had a harsh voice not cracked through the air. Hey! You again! A security guard, broad-shouldered in a black jacket, stormed down the sidewalk. His voice was loud enough to carry across the square, and with every word, heads began to turn. You don't belong here, the guard barked. Didn't I tell you last week? You and that kid, get out. A woman clutching shopping bags stopped to whisper to her friend. A man hurriedly tugged his son closer, shielding him like Grace Monroe was contagious. People slowed, not to help, but to watch, New Yorkers pretending indifference, but their sideways glances betrayed them. The guard's face twisted with disdain. You wanna eat garbage, fine. But do it where the paying customers don't have to see it. You're stinking up the block. The young woman, Grace Monroe, stood slowly. Her coat sagged from wear, but her back was straight. She drew the boy closer behind her, shielding him with her body. Her voice was low but steady. Don't talk to me like that in front of a child. The guard scoffed, stepping closer. His words came sharper now, his finger jabbing the air. What are you, a saint? You think feeding a kid trash makes you noble? Look at you, filthy coat, busted shoes, no future. What kind of example are you? That boy would be better off in a shelter than learning from you. The words were meant to crush her, and they nearly did. Grace clenched her fists until her knuckles ached. Her lips trembled, her throat burned, and she blinked furiously, refusing to let the tears win. But when the boy whimpered and pressed his face into her sleeve, her resolve cracked. Her voice slipped out, fragile and breaking. I'm just trying to feed him. The guard's sneer deepened. Sure. And I'm just trying to keep this city clean from trash like you. The sentence landed like a slap. Grace's cheeks burned with humiliation, but what hurt most wasn't the insult, it was the laughter she thought she heard from someone in the crowd. People stared, whispered, judged. To them, her pain was a spectacle. Ethan's hands curled into fists inside his pockets. He'd faced down corporate sharks, political wolves, and hostile investors. None of them had stirred his blood like this moment. And then he felt the tug on his sleeve again. Daddy, Lila whispered, her big eyes brimming. Do something. And Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent. That's enough, he barked, his voice cutting across the street like a crack of thunder. He strode forward, his polished shoes crunching on snow. The guard turned, startled. Sir, I didn't realize. I don't care who you thought she was, Ethan said coldly, his voice carrying the steel of a man used to obedience. You don't scream at people like that. Especially not at a woman. And never in front of a child. The guard faltered. I was just doing my job, sir. This isn't the place. You're done here, Ethan snapped. His glare was enough to silence any argument. Walk away. The guard hesitated, jaw tightening, before finally muttering curses under his breath and retreating. The crowd dispersed, though a few eyes lingered, their curiosity unsated. Grace stood frozen, her body still taut with the sting of humiliation. She tried to look away, to pretend the tears weren't still shining at the corners of her eyes. But Ethan saw them. More importantly, so did Lila. You can have mine too. The little girl's voice broke the silence. Lila fished a half-eaten cookie from her pocket, holding it out with mittened hands. Daddy says I make them too sweet. For a moment, Grace blinked at her. Her lips parted, and the weight on her shoulders seemed to lift just slightly. She managed the faintest smile, small but real. Thank you, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice trembling between sorrow and gratitude. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sharp clack of heels echoed from behind. The glass doors of the sleek restaurant swung open, and a woman stepped into the winter night. She was tall, wrapped in a long black coat, her heels clicking like a metronome of authority. Her lipstick was sharp, her smile sharper. Well, well, she purred, her voice dripping with mockery. Grace Monroe. Still digging through trash, I see. Grace stiffened instantly. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders squared. She didn't even need to look up to know the voice. Vanessa Cole. The woman who had once been her protégée. The woman who had destroyed her. And the night, already heavy with humiliation, grew even colder. The square had begun to settle, the curious passers-by drifting back into the night. But then came the sound that froze Grace Monroe's blood, the deliberate clack of heels across icy pavement. Well, well. The voice was sharp, smooth, and laced with cruelty. Grace Monroe. Still digging through trash, I see. Grace didn't lift her head at first. She didn't need to. The voice alone was enough to twist her stomach into knots. But slowly, carefully, she raised her chin, and there she was. Vanessa Cole. Tall. Perfectly styled. Her black designer coat looked like it had just come off a runway, her lipstick was a ruthless slash of crimson, and her heels clicked like punctuation marks of authority. She stood framed by the golden glow spilling out of the restaurant behind her, as if the warmth belonged to her alone. "Didn't expect to see you here," Grace said, her voice quiet but edged, like steel left too long in the fire. Vanessa smiled wide, her teeth gleaming under the lights. "Oh, I work here now. Downtown Manhattan suits me, don't you think? After your little empire went up in flames, someone had to keep the neighborhood respectable." Her words floated over the snow like ash. Ethan Walker felt the tension tighten in the air. He didn't know their history, but he knew poison when he heard it. Vanessa took a step forward, her heels crunching. "Tell me, Grace, still carrying that little notebook of failed recipes? Or have you traded it for a journal on how to survive the winter on scraps?" The crowd, those who lingered, snickered. A young man pulled out his phone, subtly filming. An older couple shook their heads as though Grace's suffering confirmed what they already believed about people like her. Grace's hand instinctively brushed the notebook tucked inside her coat pocket. Her jaw tightened. "Better to write with honesty than to steal from others," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but the words carried weight. Vanessa's smirk faltered for a second, then returned, sharper. "Dramatic as always. No wonder investors fled. Who wants a chef who thinks passion alone pays the bills?" The jab sank deep. Grace felt the sting of memory, the day her staff walked out, the week investors stopped returning calls, the letter from the Department of Health conveniently citing violations she knew had been planted. She remembered standing outside her own restaurant, her name being peeled off the awning as if she had never existed. "I lost everything because of you," she whispered, her voice shaking but laced with fury. Vanessa tilted her head mockingly, wagging one gloved finger. "No, darling. You lost everything because you were naive. You actually thought talent and kindness could carry you. This city runs on leverage. Connections. Deals behind closed doors. And you? You had none." Grace's throat burned. Her fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. She wanted to scream, to claw, to rip the smug smile off Vanessa's face. But the boy at her side tugged her sleeve, looking up with wide eyes. She swallowed the scream back, burying it deep. Ethan couldn't stay silent. He stepped between them, his tall frame casting a shadow that swallowed Vanessa's glow. His voice was even, cold, and powerful, the same voice that once silenced senators and investors alike. "That's enough." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. Her eyes flicked up, appraising him. Then her smile slithered back. "And who might you be?" "I'm the man who pays more in taxes each year than your entire career is worth," Ethan replied, his tone like ice. "And you're trespassing on my patience. Leave." Vanessa arched a brow, her gaze sliding to Lila, who peeked from behind her father's coat. Another lost soul charmed by the homeless chef. "Cute. Walk away," Ethan said flatly. His glare was unflinching. The smirk faltered. Vanessa hesitated, weighing his authority against her pride. Then, with a sharp exhale, she spun on her heel. "Always good at finding saviors, Grace. Let's see how long this one lasts." Her heels clicked back through the restaurant doors. The glow swallowed her whole, and she was gone. For a long moment, the square was silent except for the hum of neon and the faint wail of a distant siren. Grace released the breath she had been holding, her shoulders sagging. The boy at her side pressed closer, trembling, his small fingers clutching her sleeve. Ethan turned toward her. His brow furrowed, his voice softer now. "She used to work for you." Grace's laugh was bitter, humorless. "Work for me? She was my sous chef. Until she stole my recipes, sabotaged my license renewal, and let the press bury me alive." Ethan blinked. "Wait. You had a restaurant?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. For a moment, pride flickered in their depths, buried beneath exhaustion. "I had a life. A damn good one. Monroe's Kitchen. My name was on the door. People came from all over the city for Sunday dinner plates. Fried chicken, spiced greens, sweet potato casserole. I hired women just out of shelters. Taught them skills. Gave them dignity. I built something real." Her voice cracked. She shook her head, looking down. "And it took one betrayal to strip it all away." Ethan studied her. He had seen many people broken by failure, executives, founders, men who'd lost billions. Most crumbled. But Grace didn't feel broken. Scarred, yes. But still standing. How does someone go from that to, he gestured lightly, careful not to sound cruel. This? Grace's hand returned to her coat pocket, gripping the notebook. Her voice lowered. One scandal. One forged health report. One whisper in the right investor's ear. And no money to fight back. You think the world waits for truth? It doesn't. When you fall, Mr. Walker, people don't throw ropes. They throw stones. Her words struck like a sermon. Ethan thought of Anna, his late wife, who once said, "We don't just feed stomachs, Ethan. We feed souls." He felt the echo of her voice in the cold air. Before he could reply, a tug on his coat drew him back. "Daddy," Lila whispered, her mittened hand gripping his. "Can she come home with us? Just for dinner?" Grace stiffened, eyes darting to the little girl. She opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan hesitated first. His instincts screamed no. This was dangerous. She was a stranger, her story messy, her past scarred. Bringing her home could risk more than just reputation, it could risk safety. But then Grace spoke, her voice low, her words trembling but true. "That kitchen, it wasn't just a job. It was where people healed. Where I healed. And when I lost it, I didn't just lose a paycheck. I lost the last place that ever made me feel like I mattered." The sentence landed heavy, like a stone in his chest. Ethan froze. In her trembling words, he heard Anna's voice again, whispering from memory, "You can give a man food, but if you want to save him, give him a place at the table." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at Grace, not at her coat, not at her shoes, not at her scarred reputation. But at the leader, the fighter, the soul still standing despite the storm. He looked down at Lila's pleading eyes. Then back at Grace. "One meal," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, "One meal. If you want." Grace stared at him, suspicion flickering across her face. Her lips parted as if to argue, but then softened. Slowly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "One." And as the three of them turned and walked into the falling snow, the crowd behind them whispered again, but softer now, uncertain whether they had just witnessed scandal, or the beginning of redemption. The ride uptown was quiet. Snowflakes tapped against the tinted windows of the black SUV as the city blurred past in streaks of white and neon. Inside, warmth hung through the vents, but Grace sat stiff, her worn coat still wrapped tight around her, as though she were afraid of leaving any trace of herself on the fine leather seats. The boy leaned against her, dozing lightly, crumbs still clinging to his lips from the sandwich she had shared with him. Across from her, Ethan Walker stole glances. His daughter Lila chattered softly about the holiday lights, her voice rising and falling in a rhythm only children can maintain. But Ethan's gaze kept returning to Grace. She was quiet, withdrawn, her eyes fixed on the blur of the city beyond the glass. Yet there was something in the way she held that battered notebook in her lap, as if it were a shield, or maybe a lifeline. When the SUV turned onto Park Avenue and slowed before the tall glass sandstone tower, Grace's breath caught. She knew this world. Or rather, she had once brushed against it, when Monroe's kitchen was buzzing, when Manhattan's elite came for her Sunday suppers, when critics called her the rising soul of Harlem cuisine. Back then, she had walked into places like this on her own merit. Tonight, she arrived as a guest, or worse, a charity case. The doorman straightened at the sight of Ethan. "Evening, Mr. Walker." His eyes flickered briefly to Grace, to the boy, then back to Ethan. No questions. Just that polite but unmistakable curiosity, the kind that sticks like static. Inside, the lobby glowed with marble and glass, warm light spilling across polished floors. Grace shifted uncomfortably, pulling her coat tighter, every crystal chandelier reminding her of what she'd lost. By the time they reached the penthouse, Lila was already skipping ahead, her bunny mittens bouncing. The doors opened to a space that looked like a magazine spread. Tall windows framing the skyline, a grand piano by the wall, shelves lined with books that seemed unread. Grace paused at the threshold. She had once owned a space filled with light, too, a restaurant where laughter and the smell of frying garlic filled the air. This silence, though elegant, felt almost haunted. "Come in," Ethan said, his voice even, though he noticed the stiffness in her stance. The boy shuffled behind her. Lila ran ahead to the dining room, calling back, "Miss Grace. You have to see our Christmas tree. Daddy says it's too tall, but Mommy always said taller is better." The mention of Mommy landed like a soft thud in the room. Ethan's face flickered, but he said nothing. Grace followed slowly, her boots scuffing lightly against the polished floor. The dining room glowed under a crystal chandelier. A massive oak table stretched across the room, its polished surface gleaming. To Grace, it looked less like a place for meals and more like a stage, cold, perfect, untouched. Mrs. Dolores, the longtime housekeeper, emerged from the kitchen carrying a basket of warm rolls. She stopped mid-step when she saw Grace, her brows arching in silent question. But she said nothing, just set the basket down with a kind of knowing patience that only comes from years of watching broken souls pass through. Grace sat at the edge of one chair, her coat still on, hands folded tightly in her lap. The chandelier's light bounced off polished silverware and porcelain dishes, objects she used to handle daily, but now seemed like artifacts from another life. "Daddy says the red napkins are for special people," Lila announced proudly, placing one at Grace's spot. "So you get the red one. Mommy always loved red." Grace blinked, unsure how to respond. Slowly, she touched the napkin, its crisp fabric oddly heavy in her hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. Ethan watched, his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair. He had invited strangers into boardrooms, lawyers into negotiations worth billions. But this? Bringing a woman who had been eating from a trash bin into his home felt more dangerous, more exposing. "So," he said finally, his voice measured. "You had a restaurant?" Grace's eyes stayed on her lap. "Yes. Monroe's Kitchen. It was mine, until it wasn't. You said sabotage." She let out a bitter laugh. "Call it sabotage. Call it betrayal. Call it lies. Take your pick. It doesn't matter anymore." Her gaze flicked up, sharp now. "How do you fight when you've got no money for lawyers, no partners left to vouch for you, and the press decides you're guilty before you can open your mouth?" The intensity in her stare surprised him. She wasn't meek. She wasn't fragile. She was scarred, yes, but sharp, like steel that had survived fire. Before Ethan could respond, Lila wrinkled her nose. "Miss Grace, can you make the potatoes again? The ones you cooked in the kitchen before smelled better than Daddy's." Ethan cleared his throat, hiding a smirk. "She did more than make potatoes, Lila." He gestured to the steaming dish that Grace had quietly prepared in the kitchen while Dolores set the table. "Go on, tell her." Grace hesitated, then leaned toward the little girl. "It's called sweet potato braise with southern spice. At my restaurant, it was the best seller. People lined up after church just to get a plate." Lila's eyes widened. "Like Mommy did." The words hit the table like a dropped glass. Ethan's fork stilled. His chest tightened. "Yes," he said quietly. "Your mom loved that dish." Grace's expression softened. "Your mother came to my restaurant often." Ethan froze. "At first, she just ordered the dish every week," Grace continued. Her voice grew softer, almost reverent. "Then one day, she asked me to teach her how to make it. She said food was her way of speaking love. She burned through 3 pans before getting it right, but she never gave up. She laughed about it, wrote everything down in a little notebook. We became friends." Ethan's throat closed. Images rushed back, Anna in their kitchen, flour dust on her cheeks, laughing as she scribbled notes in a small book. He had never asked where she learned that dish, just assumed she'd picked it up somewhere. "She told me once," Grace went on, her eyes distant, "that cooking that dish made her feel closer to you. Like she wasn't just feeding your body, but your heart." Ethan set his fork down slowly. The weight of her words pressed on him like a stone. For years, he had carried Anna's memory like a wound, silent, untouchable. And here was Grace, a stranger, yet the keeper of a piece of Anna's soul he hadn't known. "You've been carrying this all alone, haven't you?" he said quietly. Grace gave a humorless smile, tapping the notebook beside her. "I carry it in this. Every recipe. Every memory. Every piece of me they couldn't steal." The room was still. The fire in the hearth crackled faintly, the only sound between them. Lila leaned against her father's arm, sleepy but listening, her wide eyes flicking between the two adults. Ethan straightened slowly, his decision hardening inside him like cooling steel. "Grace," he said, his voice steady. "You shouldn't be out there begging scraps when you have the talent to build something real. I want to help you rebuild." Her eyes snapped to his, narrowing. "Help me?" "Yes. I'll invest. We'll bring back Monroe's kitchen. Clear your name. Reopen the doors." Shock flickered across her face, then disbelief, then something bordering on anger. "You think I need a billionaire swooping in to save me? To pat me on the head and hand me a charity kitchen?" Ethan leaned forward, his tone firm. "This isn't charity. This is business. This is legacy. That dish you served tonight, it carried my wife's soul. If you think I can just walk away from that, you're wrong." Grace shook her head. "Businessmen don't invest in broken names. You'd be throwing money at a ghost." "I don't throw money," Ethan countered. His eyes held hers, unwavering. "I build futures. And I see one in you." Her lips parted, but no words came. For so long, people had looked at her with pity or suspicion. Never with certainty. Still, she whispered, "Why would you risk it?" His voice softened, the steel giving way to something raw. "Because Anna believed in you. And because I know a good investment when I taste it. But if I put my name on this, I want a seat at the table. You run the kitchen. I'll run the structure. We rebuild together." Grace studied him for a long moment. Her scarred hands rested on the notebook, trembling slightly. Then she nodded once, slowly. "If you're in it with me," she murmured, "not over me, then maybe it could work." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the faint spark of possibility ignite. He reached across the table, offering his hand. After a pause, Grace placed hers in his. Rough. Scarred. But steady. From the end of the table, Lila clapped her little hands together. Does this mean Miss Grace gets her restaurant back? Ethan smiled faintly. Something like that. Good, Lila grinned, because when I grow up, I want to cook like you and Mommy. Maybe even better. Grace laughed, the sound rusty but alive. Then I suppose I'll have to start teaching you, little chef. And in that warm penthouse dining room, under the soft hum of memories and the glow of the fire, something that had been broken for a long time, quietly began to mend. Grace hadn't laughed in years, not really. The sound startled her almost as much as it seemed to startle Ethan. It came out rusty, fragile, but real. She covered her mouth quickly, as if afraid she'd broken some unspoken rule by letting it slip in a place like this. But Lila clapped again, delighted. You laugh like Mommy used to. Grace's heart jolted. She didn't know what to say. She looked to Ethan, but his eyes were cast down at his plate, his fork unmoved, his jaw tight. Mention of Anna always seemed to carve something raw into the air, like opening a window in winter. Grace tried to redirect. Well, maybe laughter is an ingredient, too. Makes the food taste better. Lila gasped. Is that why Daddy's food always tastes boring? Ethan coughed into his glass, hiding a smirk. Grace couldn't help it, the laugh slipped again, freer this time. Mrs. Dolores, passing through with another dish, arched an eyebrow. She had seen this house sink into silence after Anna's passing. Tonight, she heard something she hadn't in years, laughter echoing against the walls. Grace shifted in her chair. The red napkin lay folded across her lap, too fine against the frayed fabric of her coat. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of a table set not for survival, but for sharing. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes, spiced greens, and warm rolls filled the air. She should have felt like an intruder, an outsider. Instead, she felt something she had thought was gone forever. Home. Her fingers traced the edge of her notebook, hidden under the table. This was her last tether to the woman she used to be. Every recipe inside, every smudge of grease and note in the margins, was proof she had once mattered. And now this man, this billionaire stranger, was offering to build a future on it. She wanted to believe him. She also wanted to run. You're serious, she said softly, studying Ethan. About investing in me? He nodded. I don't make empty offers. If I say I'll build, I build. But the world doesn't forget, Grace murmured. My name is Mud. People will line up to tear me down again. Ethan leaned back, his gaze unwavering. Then let them line up. We'll give them something they can't ignore. She shook her head, almost laughing again, but this time bitterly. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, he admitted. But I've spent my life betting on people everyone else gave up on. And I've never tasted anything like what you cooked tonight. He paused, his voice lowering. It's not just food. It's memory. It's love. That's rare. Too rare to let die in the snow. Grace swallowed hard. His words pressed against the walls she had built around herself. For years, people had offered her pity, suspicion, judgment. Never belief. You talk like a man who's never lost, she whispered. His eyes darkened. I buried a wife who was the heart of this home. Don't mistake me for untouched. Silence lingered. Grace looked away quickly, blinking hard. She hadn't expected honesty. Not like that. Lila broke the heaviness again. She scooted closer to Grace, her little hands tugging at her sleeve. Miss Grace. When you teach me to cook, can we make cookies too? Daddy burns them. Ethan groaned, rubbing his forehead. One time. Grace chuckled softly. Of course, little chef. Cookies, pies, anything you want. For the first time that night, her shoulders eased. She caught Ethan watching her again, his expression unreadable, half calculation, half something warmer, softer. It made her chest tighten in ways she hadn't felt in years. The boy beside her, silent for most of the evening, finally whispered, "Can I have another roll?" His voice was timid, but hopeful. "Of course," Dolores said gently, placing the basket in front of him. Grace's throat constricted. She hadn't seen him smile in weeks. Tonight, a crumb of joy returned to his face. As the fire crackled and the city glowed beyond the tall windows, Grace let herself believe, for just a moment, that maybe this wasn't pity. Maybe this was possibility. But deep down, she knew the world outside these glass walls wouldn't stay silent for long. And she wasn't wrong. The next morning, sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, slicing golden lines across the dining table still scattered with last night's remnants. A forgotten fork, an empty glass, the faint scent of cinnamon and sweet potatoes still lingered in the air. Grace sat at the far end, her battered notebook open, scribbling furiously. Ingredients, measurements, arrows pointing to memories only she could decode. Her lips moved silently as she wrote, like a woman speaking a language she thought she'd lost. Ethan entered quietly, a mug of coffee in hand. For a moment, he just watched. She looked different here in the daylight, not just tired and scarred, but alive, as though something had stirred back to life. "You've been up early," he said. Grace didn't look up. "Habit. Chefs don't sleep late. At least, they didn't when I was one." She closed the notebook gently, her eyes flicking up at him. "I appreciate what you said last night. But words are one thing. The world outside this house doesn't forget so easily." Before Ethan could respond, small footsteps pattered across the room. "Daddy! Miss Grace!" Lila's voice was breathless, excited, but her eyes looked troubled. She held out her tablet. "Look." Ethan took it, scanning the screen. His jaw clenched. Sterling Tech CEO seen dining with fallen chef. Below the headline, a grainy photo captured them from the night before, Grace walking beside Ethan and Lila, snow falling around them. Grace froze. "Already?" Ethan scrolled. The comments hit like blows. Gold digger using the kid for sympathy. Why would a man like Sterling tarnish his name with a washed-up chef? That's not a business partnership. That's a scandal waiting to happen. Lila's small voice trembled. Why are they saying bad things about Miss Grace? She didn't do anything wrong. Grace reached over, brushing the girl's arm gently. "It's all right, little chef. Sometimes people talk when they don't know the truth." But her voice cracked. She knew too well the power of lies. Ethan set the tablet down firmly, his face hard. "This is exactly why we rebuild. We take control of the story. We don't let them define it." Grace shook her head. "You don't get it. When the press decides someone's guilty, it doesn't matter what the truth is. They'll twist it. They'll drag your name through the mud with mine." "I've survived worse storms," Ethan said flatly. "And you don't know me if you think I back down from a fight." But even as he said it, a flicker of doubt stirred in his chest. He knew investors. He knew boardrooms. They didn't like risks. And Grace, whether she deserved it or not, was a risk. Later that morning, Ethan retreated to his office for a video call with his board. Grace lingered in the kitchen, rinsing plates from breakfast. Through the half-open door, fragments of his voice carried to her. "Optics are unfortunate but temporary. No, I don't intend to issue a statement yet. She's not a liability. She's a future investment." Grace froze, her hands tightening on the sponge. That word, liability. He hadn't said it. They had. But it echoed like a gavel in her ears. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a risk on a balance sheet. When Ethan emerged, loosening his tie, he found her leaning against the counter, arms crossed, her expression stormy. "You realize they're not just after me, right?" she said, her voice sharp. "They'll come after you. Your company. Your daughter." Ethan met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "Then we face it together." The firmness in his voice unsettled her. She had expected pity, maybe a cold withdrawal. "Not this. You talk like it's that simple," she said. "Like you can just throw money at a problem until it disappears." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Money doesn't erase everything. Believe me. If it could, Anna would still be here." The words hit Grace like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were raw. She had forgotten, in the storm of her own pain, that he carried wounds too. She softened slightly, but her voice trembled. "I don't want to be the reason your world burns." "You're not," Ethan said. "You're the reason it might start living again." Before she could answer, Lila burst back in, her mittened hands clutching her coloring book. "Daddy, Miss Grace, look. I drew our restaurant." Grace blinked. "Our?" Lila beamed. On the page, she had scrawled a building with a big red sign, Monroe's Kitchen. Stick figures, one tall, one with messy curls, one small with bunny ears, stood smiling in front of it. Grace's throat tightened. She crouched beside the girl, her fingers brushing the crayon lines. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan looked down at the picture, then back at Grace. And he knew, without a doubt, that he was already in too deep to turn back. But outside those tall windows, the storm was only just beginning. The storm didn't wait. By afternoon, the headlines had multiplied. Sterling backing a scandal. Homeless chef or hustler. Monroe's Kitchen, resurrection or reputation suicide. Every news ticker, every finance blog, every social feed carried Grace's name, dragging her history into the spotlight again. Her fall, her alleged failures, the whispers of financial misconduct and health violations Vanessa had planted years ago. Grace sat at the kitchen counter, her hands trembling around a mug of untouched coffee. The boy sat beside her, doodling on a scrap of paper, blissfully unaware of the claws of the world outside. Lila hummed to herself, coloring quietly, her small presence a bubble of innocence amid the storm. Ethan walked in, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and measured. "No, I said no statement. Optics don't scare me. Results do." He ended the call, tossing the phone onto the counter. His jaw was tight, his tie loosened. "They're circling like sharks," Grace said softly. "Let them circle," Ethan replied. "Sharks only bite when they smell blood. And I don't bleed easy." Grace stared at him. "You can't protect me from this. You can't protect your daughter from this. They'll say I'm a risk. A liability." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the counter, meeting her eyes. "Grace, listen to me. You are not a liability. You're an asset waiting to be rebuilt." Her laugh was bitter. "That's easy to say from behind glass walls. Out there, I'm still the chef who lost it all. The one who fed the tabloids more than I ever fed a customer." "Then prove them wrong," Ethan said simply. Grace blinked. "How?" "Do what you do best. Cook. Show them who you are. Not with words. With fire." The challenge settled between them like a gauntlet thrown. Grace's fingers twitched against the notebook. Cooking had always been her language, her way of speaking when words failed. But could food alone drown out years of lies? That night, Ethan invited 3 of his most skeptical board members to the penthouse. They arrived stiff, skeptical, coats dripping with melted snow, eyes scanning the room as if expecting scandal to leap from the walls. "Mr. Walker," one of them said coldly, "you've built your empire on clean optics. This association, with all due respect, jeopardizes that." Ethan's expression didn't waver. "Sit down. Eat first. Then we'll talk optics." The men exchanged glances, but curiosity, or perhaps arrogance, kept them seated. In the kitchen, Grace's hands shook as she tied the apron Lila had found in a drawer. She hadn't cooked for critics, for power, in years. Her breath came fast, shallow. Then she closed her eyes, hearing Anna's voice again in memory. "Food isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Be here, Grace." She opened her notebook. The pages were smudged, stained, edges curled. But to her, it was scripture. She touched the words, steadied herself, and lit the flame. Garlic hissed in the pan, butter melting into gold. Sweet potatoes caramelized, filling the air with warmth. Spices bloomed, the scent rich and alive, curling through the penthouse like an anthem. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. She moved with grace now, her fear melting into muscle memory. Chop. Stir. Taste. Adjust. The kitchen became her stage, the fire her voice. At the table, the board members sniffed the air, eyebrows raising despite themselves. The aroma was undeniable. When Grace finally set the plates down, her hands didn't shake. She presented each dish with quiet dignity, her gaze steady. Sweet potato braise with southern spice. It fed families every Sunday at Monroe's kitchen. Tonight, it will feed you. The men exchanged looks. One forked a bite hesitantly, then another. Silence fell as they chewed. Not the silence of disdain, but the heavy pause of being disarmed. Ethan watched, satisfaction flickering in his chest. He had seen numbers impress, speeches persuade, technology dazzle. But nothing silenced power like truth tasted on the tongue. Finally, one of the men cleared his throat. "This is extraordinary." Another leaned back, his skepticism faltering. "It's soulful. Familiar, yet refined." Grace stood straighter. Food isn't just about flavor. It's about dignity. About giving people a place at the table who never thought they'd have one. That's what Monroe's kitchen was. That's what it can be again. Her voice didn't shake this time. It carried. The men shifted, glancing at Ethan. He didn't look at them. His gaze stayed on Grace, pride simmering in his chest. When the board members finally left, muttering about considerations and potential PR angles, Grace sank into a chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her, his hand resting lightly on the table near hers. "It's more than enough." You reminded them that behind the headlines is a chef who still has fire. Lila patted in, rubbing her eyes. "Miss Grace, did they like it?" Grace smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, little chef. They did." "Good," Lila yawned. "Because when we open our restaurant, I want to be the taste tester." Grace laughed, her body shaking with the release of it. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel foreign. Ethan rose, watching her. "You said once that kitchens are where people heal. Maybe, this is where we start healing too." Grace looked at him, really looked. For years, she had carried the weight of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, the ache of being forgotten. Tonight, for the first time, she felt seen, not as a liability, not as a scandal, but as a chef. As herself. She exhaled, her voice quiet but steady. "Maybe." And in that penthouse kitchen, with fire still warm on the stove and laughter echoing softly through the halls, something broken in both of them began, slowly, to mend. Outside, the storm of headlines raged on. But inside, around that table, there was light. 6 months later, the corner of 116th Street and Lenox Avenue buzzed with life again. The once shuttered brick building that locals had passed with sighs and shakes of the head now gleamed under a fresh coat of paint. A new sign stretched proudly across the awning. Monroe's Kitchen, Reborn. Grace Monroe stood on the sidewalk, her hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from awe. She wore a crisp white chef's coat, her name embroidered neatly on the chest. The notebook, once battered and hidden, was now framed behind the counter, a relic of survival. The line outside stretched down the block, neighbors, church families, curious foodies, even old regulars who had whispered that the place would never rise again. They were here, waiting. Beside her, Ethan adjusted his suit jacket, watching the crowd with a calm smile. Lila clutched his hand, bouncing on her toes. "Daddy, look. It's longer than the toy store line." Grace laughed, the sound rich and free. "Well, that means you'll have to help me in the kitchen, little chef." "I'm ready." Lila squealed, tugging at her tiny apron. The doors opened, and the aroma of frying garlic, butter, and caramelizing sweet potatoes spilled into the air. Inside, the tables gleamed, the walls glowed with fresh paint, and the hum of anticipation filled every corner. Grace stepped through first, her heart pounding. This was more than a restaurant. It was resurrection. The first plates left the kitchen, spiced greens, golden cornbread, her signature sweet potato braise. The crowd leaned forward, forks poised, eyes hungry not just for food but for hope. When the first bite landed, silence followed. Then came the sighs. The murmurs. The clapping of hands against tables. A man in the corner wiped his eyes. "Tastes just like I remember." A woman whispered, "She's back." Grace leaned against the counter, her chest tight, tears stinging her eyes. For years, she had carried shame, betrayal, the weight of being forgotten. Tonight, she carried something else, dignity. Ethan stepped beside her, his voice low. "You did this." Grace shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No. We did." Lila ran up, arms wide. "Miss Grace, everyone loves it." Grace scooped her up, holding her close. "Then let's keep feeding them, little chef. Because food doesn't just fill bellies, it heals souls." And as laughter and warmth filled the air, Monroe's Kitchen lived again, not just as a restaurant, but as a place of second chances. If this story moved you, give this video a like and drop the city you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of second chances and redemption. Because you never know who else might need to hear this today.